Well, Larry, I know there's so much territory I want to try to cover with you, and actually a lot about tennis, which is a big part of your life. But we have to start with the news of the day. And now we all wake up today and we see talk about in the spring again, or football being pushed off, and now with the Ivy League's potential announcement coming. So that broad open floor as we talk on Monday afternoon, July 6th, with the knowledge that it changes rapidly. Where do you think we stand with college football?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we're just trying to let the data and the recommendations from our medical advisors drive us. I'd say a couple of weeks ago, I was cautiously optimistic that college football would start on time and we'd be able to try to play a full season. But the last few weeks have been tough. A lot of outbreaks. We've seen on campuses as student athletes come back for their voluntary workouts, as students are coming back to campuses. College-age kids are being college-age kids. They're going out and they're socializing, going to bars, going to parties, and sure enough, there are decent outbreaks of the virus, which is a bit of a microcosm for society at large, as we've taken our foot off the brakes a little bit and opened up bars and restaurants and other things. It's just not good. So I think the handwriting's on the wall that until there's a vaccine, we're going to have to stay in, some form of lockdown for a while and take very, very seriously these measures. Certainly, if colleges are going to be open and students are going to be back on campus, it seems like it's really only going to work if students really take the social distancing, mask wearing, hand sanitization, all the other measures really seriously. Otherwise, it's going to be tough. So at this stage, hard to predict. We've got a few more weeks, I think, to see how things progress with students and student athletes back on campus doing voluntary workouts. The precursor to football practices. We'll see what our campus plans are in terms of reopening, having students back. We'll see how the pro leagues do as they get ready to play again, and then we'll make a decision.
Yeah, I know, Larry, when we talked in March, when everything stopped, it was important that it be known that this was not an athletics decision. This was university's decision and university's presence. I assume it's, as we talk in July, it's the same thing?
Yeah, there's a lot of decision-making layers involved in this thing. I mean, first of all, health and safety is going to be paramount. And that decision is really going to be made by public health officials, governors, county officials, as to whether it's even possible for us to play or not. The next layer after that are university presidents and chancellors that are going to make the decision if their campuses are going to be open, they're going to welcome back students, which I think is a gating issue for college sports. I can't see us having student athletes back on campus, asking them to practice and compete if it's not deemed to be safe for students to be back on campus. And then after that, the conferences and athletics departments kick in to figure out, well, how could we organize the season? So yeah, let's just say it's a shared governance model here when it comes to return to play. There's going to be a lot of sign-offs for it to happen.
If I could just rattle off a couple of quick things here, because I know from conversations with a lot of folks, you have discussed all options over the last 4 months. So the potential of having a model where some say yes, some say we're not sure, and maybe because of an individual state situation, one or two say I can't. Is that still feasible, and how does that play out?
The level of collaboration has been great, not just within our conference, but nationally, with my peers, the commissioners of the other conferences. And I think there's a desire to try to move forward together. The only way we can play a complete college football season is if we all agree, right? Because we've got all these non-conference matchups. We've got bowl games. We've got the college football playoff. So we're all trying to move forward in lockstep. And I'm hoping that's true of my conference as well, that all 12 of our schools can decide to move forward together. But the truth is, this is a very regional, local thing in terms of how the virus is acting and how communities are doing to manage it. In our league, we got Southern California, Arizona dealing with some big outbreaks at the moment, and other parts of the Pacific Northwest, Colorado, Utah, that seem to be managing it okay. So, we'll try to move forward in lockstep, but it remains to be seen whether that's possible or not.
Yeah. Does conference only still on the table? Is that a realistic option?
Yeah, I think our preference, of course, is to play a full season. Again, if it's healthy, safe, and we get the requisite approvals. If not, and we've got a delayed start to the season, then we might default to a conference-only model. And if that's not possible, you might start looking at the spring. But I think we're trying to take a very measured approach step by step, not making any decisions before we have to, because it's such a rapidly escalating series of events, and 1 week to the next, it's changing. So I think we're going to take it a step at a time. And there's no guarantee that, the winter is going to be any better than now, or the spring's going to be any better than now. I know we're all holding out hope that a vaccine's coming soon, but there's no guarantees of any of that. So I think you can only deal with the information that you've got at the time, what's in front of you. And I think we're all trying to balance the seriousness of the virus, the spread, our sense of community and social responsibility on the one hand. On the other hand, figuring a way, how are we going to live with this? How are we going to kind of get back to some sense of normalcy? And, when it comes to college age students, being able to get back on campus, have that whole aspect of their education continue. I think about the importance of college sports to America and the society and how badly fans want it back. I think there's, a lot of weight to these decisions that we're trying to make.
That's a great point. I want to come back to that in just 1 second, but the last little clipboard one is if you can address the appetite to play without fans. And for example, we've already seen it in tennis. They're playing exhibition events in various places in the United States, mostly without fans, but they just had one in Atlanta with spectators at appropriate distance apparently, but no masks, and it was jarring to see. So let's ramp that up 10x to college football. What can you tell us about the appetite of the schools to do that?
Yeah. Well, the appetite is the schools is to have as many fans as possible. Yeah. Right? They want it for their fans. They want it for the atmosphere, for the student athletes of the competition. They want it from a revenue perspective. It's going to be devastating for our campuses if you can't have fans, and they lose all that revenue and the donation money. So I think those are major challenges if they can't. Well, I think we can control our approach to the season and coming back to play and try to do that collectively. I very much expect a decision about fans to be made on a local level, and we're likely to have a patchwork. I think governors, state public health officials will be involved in determining what the limits are. I have to say, if I could wave a wand, from the information I have, especially in outdoor stadia, not really clear to me why we couldn't have some fans in a stadium, appropriately socially distanced, with all the hygiene measures, wearing masks if necessary. If we're going to allow customers to come back to eat at restaurants outdoors, for example. Yeah. It's not clear to me why we can't have some percentage of an outdoor football stadium be full. If people are willing to follow the rules and be separated, wear masks, follow the other rules. So feels like a bit of a blunt instrument to say no fans. To me, I think we can be a little bit more creative and thoughtful about the real risks involved in that. But again, I don't think we as a conference are going to be involved, or individual schools are really going to be involved in those decisions. I think we're going to be told by public health officials what the rules are around mass gatherings.
You just talked, Larry, and it was a great segue about the importance of college sports. You were a college athlete. I've heard this repeatedly, and of course we've all heard about we know about the budget situations that all schools are going to face at every level of college athletics. Now, the elimination of sport. For example, tennis, your sport. We've already seen a number of tennis programs eliminated, more D2 and D3. But, I'm just interested from your standpoint, how you feel that's going forward coming out of this, because this conference of all values Olympic sports. It's why it is the Conference of Champions. What's your sense after 4 months of that, how that falls out?
Well, look, it's a time of great anxiety for people because there's so much that's unknown and there's so much at stake. If we have an impaired college football season with less games than we expect or less fans than we expect, there are going to be very significant negative consequences to our university's athletics department's budgets. And these revenues from football, that's what funds all the other sports. In the Pac-12, we've got 24 different sports, 12 male sports, 12 female sports, and there's only 2 that generate revenue across the board, football and men's basketball to a much lesser degree. The rest is investment and supporting opportunities for student athletes. Our conference really prides itself on its broad-based commitment to sports. We win more national championships than any other conference. A very deep commitment to supporting all these opportunities for our 7,000 student athletes in the Pac-12. But if the revenue is not there, because football is impacted, some things are going to give. I know our campuses are going to try really hard to bridge a one-year financial challenge, and we at the conference are going to help them try to line up some financing and financial support if that's necessary. But if this is a sustained issue over time, people are going to have to recalibrate and going to have to prioritize. And I know there's a lot of nervous people, not only in my conference office, but on our campuses, that programs that are cost centers rather than revenue neutral or revenue generators could be at risk.
That's good to hear, Larry. So rather than course corrections up front, there's the chance, as you said, for the conference to help provide, if it's a one-year life raft, so to speak, to help prevent that from happening?
Yeah, we're going to try hard to help our schools bridge whatever short-term financial challenges they have. And that's one of the big existential questions out there. Is this a one-year blip and a vaccine's going to come on the one hand? And on the other hand, the psychology of fans and society is such, are people going to just go back to normal next season and attendance will be full and the revenues will be back? I don't know. We'll see. I think we're hopeful it'll be a short-term thing. And once we have the confidence through a vaccine or otherwise, or therapeutics, that people can go back to attending mass gatherings. But it's a little bit unclear what the new normal looks like in our society as a result of this. I'm pretty confident TV ratings are going to be blockbuster. Fans are dying for sport back and they're missing it. And I think there's a lot of pent-up demand to see certainly college football if it comes back. I'm talking to my TV partners. I think they're expecting blockbuster ratings if we come back. But the crowd that attends the games is a very important component of this, as well as financially.
All right, I want to talk, because you had such a history in tennis, player, administrator on both sides, both the men's tour and running the women's tour at a very, very groundbreaking time. So I think it was about 11 years ago, you left to come to the Pac-12. And you referenced 11 years ago, I was reading some stories about it again yesterday, about how the tours need to merge. You had tried, you didn't think it was possible at that point. Now, during the pandemic, suddenly the thought comes out again. And whose voice was it, though? It's Roger Federer's voice, right? I wonder if you listened to that and thought it was different, because here was a top player who obviously can't make it happen, but just lending his voice, does that make more of an impact?
Absolutely. To not to bury the lead, the top players' support for the idea of better alignment between the men's and women's tour was the impediment. Yeah. At least when I floated the ideas and developed the plans and socialized it, 12 years ago now. And Roger was around that time. There's been a great continuity at the top of the men's game, and the same names, Roger, Rafa, Novak. Those are the top players at the time, which has been such a blessing for men's tennis. The continuity of these great stars and great personalities. But those are the players that were against the idea at the time. Didn't feel like the men's tour needed the women's tour to get to the next level. I saw it very differently. I think I had a somewhat unique vantage point, cutting my teeth in men's tennis as a player. Head of the Players Association, along with VJ Armitrage and others for many, many years. And then as one of the top executives at the ATP in different positions, I kind of understood the strength of men's tennis, but also the challenges men's tennis was going to face to try to get to the next level in this global sports marketplace. I always felt that we were boxing below our weight level in certain respects. And then when I went over the women's tour, I was there for 6 years, and we had some nice success, but I also realized that there would be challenges, moving forward there. So it became clear to me when I was, asked to look at what was going on with the ATP, and in my role at that stage, that that would be a big leap forward for the sport to combine in a closer way. And I don't know, the full-blown merger is necessary or feasible, but I did a lot of work over a period of about 6 months, a lot of outside consultants on what different creative, flexible approaches could be that would help align the assets. I mean, the truth is tennis has got some unique challenges because it's global. It's in and out of markets. It's not in any market on a year-round basis. The global nature of the athletes means, there'll be some hot, some not. And we're competing against football, basketball, auto racing, a lot of sports that are presented in much more organized and stronger and cohesive way in their market. So look, men's tennis doing great, doing fine. Women's tennis is doing great, by far the leading pro sport for women. I mean, there's no sport even close. So, I mean, each of the men's tour and women's tour are doing fine on their own. But it was as clear to me, as it could be 12 years ago, and the same is true today, that tennis is capable of much greater success in terms of eyeballs and TV ratings and TV revenues and attendance and interest. We used to call it column inches in the newspaper. I guess we don't call it that way anymore. I guess we call it impressions or engagement. Right now, whatever your favorite metric, tennis would get more if it were better presented, more organized, less fragmented, and you had the best of the men's tour assets together with the women's tour assets, and you could figure out the governance pieces if there was a will. But really, the showstopper 12 years ago were the top men's players saying they didn't think the time was right. So yeah, I certainly piqued my interest when I saw Roger speak up, and 12 years is a long time as well. He's really emerged as an incredibly thoughtful, articulate leader, seems to have his heart in the right place, very well respected for his comments about tennis, but the world at large, his actions speak louder than his words. He gives back a lot philanthropically and all that. So he's now a father. I don't think it was.
There it is. Larry, I as soon as you said that about Roger, that's the first thing that thought and jumped in my mind. And I think a lot of folks know I have a friendship with a guy that used to play, a lefty, who I've known for a long time. And I would tell you the same thing. His personality, once he became the father of a daughter, and now multiple times, Roger has twin girls, right? It's amazing how that changes your viewpoint.
It happens to all of us. You take a different view of the world and the impact that you want to make, and what opportunity and fairness is about. But I think it's really hard. I mean, when you're in the eye of the storm as a player, to kind of understand the levers and what drives global fan interest in a sport and what drives the revenue. But sort of as you become an elder statesman and you've been around a while and you've been frustrated over many years, I also think you're willing to experiment, maybe try some things that you weren't willing to when you were younger, because you see that doing the same thing over and over again, guess what? It's not creating a different result.
Yeah. The simple, I think for a lot of, certainly I say it, and I think it's an easy thing to say, is tennis is so much better when the two tours are together. The 4 championships, Indian Wells, Miami, Cincinnati, several of the other major events around the globe. When the two tours are together, tennis is at its best. And so that's where, without knowing the business entanglements and how to join them, it seems so simple to say that.
Yeah, that's complicated, like a lot of things in tennis. And tennis isn't alone. There's a lot of sports that have their challenges in terms of their structure. Tennis is just very fragmented, and figuring out ways for entities to work together between the ITF, the Grand Slams, the ATP, WTA, has always been challenging. So I certainly know from the inside that it's easier said than done, but it's also crystal clear to me that it would benefit everyone if there was a way to do it.
Yeah, the impact of a leading player's voice, and I've never asked you the actual story, but you were in a meeting, I believe it was 2005, where Venus Williams made a pitch to I believe the 4 majors about equating the prize money for men and women, straight equal at the 4 majors. And it was 2 years later, Wimbledon, and finally Roland Garros was the last domino to fall. But if you can't just talk about that and the impact of having, at the time, Venus Williams, who was at the top of the sport, major champion, taking that stand and being that bold.
Yeah, well, the player's voice is the strongest and the most genuine. In fact, there's a really cool ESPN 30 for 30 special on this whole story. It's called Venus Versus, and you hear a lot in Venus's own voice about it, which is awesome. Yeah, no, I after all my years in men's tennis and coming to the women's tour, one of the top issues for the players at the time was getting equal prize money, in addition to better television arrangements, increased prize money, more sponsor support, a bunch of things, but equal prize money was a very top issue. And I should start by saying leaders in women's tennis well before me had made the most progress on that, thanks to the foundational leadership of Billie Jean King, the original pioneer for women's tennis and women's sports, and plenty of leaders that came before me made a lot of progress. I think by the time I arrived in 2003 as the chairman and CEO of the Women's Tennis Tour, I think prize money at Wimbledon and Roland Garros was close to 90% of the men. I mean, so we're not talking about vast differences, which made it all the more silly to me that there was a difference. It really wasn't going to be about the money. At the end of the day, there was a point of principle that was being made, but that point of principle was equally important for the women's players, and who were doing better and better from an exposure and a popularity standpoint. At any rate, early on, as I had my meetings with the players, I said, look, if this is important to you, I think we can make a lot of progress and make the case and do the research. From my perspective, it was a no-brainer that Wimbledon and Roland Garros would close that remaining 10% and kind of put the issue behind and be on the right side of history. I said, but I'm going to need your help. People will see me as the hired gun, the suit. They expect me to make the case like many of my predecessors had done before. But in all my experience, relationships with the Grand Slams, they're going to want to know this is important to you as the players, because I think their hearts are in the right place for the most part with the players, and they want to do right by the players. And if they think it's genuinely important to players, I think that'll make the biggest impact. And I'll be there to help, to support, to lead, and all that. But it needs to be a partnership. So we embarked on jury, tried a bunch of different things, but it got to the point where I recall the player meeting at Wimbledon. Towards in those days, I don't know if we're still doing it that way, would always hold all player meetings and then player council meetings on the eve of the Grand Slam starting. So on the eve of the Wimbledon meeting, I said, look, I've got my annual get together with the Grand Slam chairman and their staffs at the end of Wimbledon. And this was at a top player meeting that I was having. I think got together with the top 10 players. Normally I'd go in, talk about the things I want to talk about. Look, if we want to press our case for equal prize money, I'll need one of you to come with me. I know it's the beginning of Wimbledon. We don't know who's going to be there. My meeting is usually the day before the women's final. And can we agree that whichever of you are in the final of Wimbledon, one of you will come with me and press the case? And I think that's the next step. Need your help. And everyone nodded their head. The fortnight started. Tennis, was being played. Wasn't really another word about that. After the semifinal, I was obviously keeping track, but I wasn't really discussing it with anyone. And about an hour after her semifinal win, it was on a Thursday at Wimbledon, my phone rings. And it's Venus saying, hey, Larry, remember that conversation that we had at the top player meeting before Wimbledon? What time are we on tomorrow? And you could have knocked me over with a feather, because I thought for sure I was going to have to be the one on my staff chasing down the players and their agents to remind them and convince them. I mean, it's the last thing a player wants to do the day before a Wimbledon final, but it tells you a lot about Venus and how thoughtful and deep she really is. And not only did she not forget, but proactively stepped up. And we talked a little bit about the meeting, but what the objectives were. But I certainly didn't script her in any way, but we talked about and she and I had a lot of conversations kind of about the issue, because she was one of the player leaders at the time. And we met before, went into the meeting room together at the All England Club. There were about 15 people in the room representing the 4 Grand Slams in the ITF. And I made a short introduction, turned it over to Venus, and that was very much her show. And she gave a very compelling, very emotive, very personal talk about what it felt like to her and the impact on girls, and what a significant issue this is, an important moment, try to do the right thing. And it was a very poignant and intimate thing to be a part of. And I think it made a big impact on the folks that were in that room, and was an important milestone in getting equal prize money at Wimbledon and ultimately Roland Garros as well.
Yeah. That's why, I mean, and you deserve a ton of credit, Larry, for what you did in pushing, but that's why it's important to tell that story, because that's a side of Venus. Venus doesn't talk very much anymore, unfortunately, and she doesn't tell that story. I actually have tried to talk to her about it in the past, and she's been very reluctant. So that's why I just think sharing that's wonderful. And now to circle back. So if Roger Federer and or Rafa and or Novak, we know where Andy Murray stands on this. That's very clear. But if those three or any combination of those three walked into an ATP meeting and did that kind of thing, do you think it would swing? Could it swing the pendulum strongly to getting where we think tennis should be with the two tours together?
Yeah, well, I'm not really aware of, kind of how deep or how serious the discussions are, but yeah, I've always been a believer. My start in tennis was as a player, and then, with the ATP when it was a players association. So I've always believed that players, when they're organized, they've really thought about the issues, when they're aligned, want to advocate, can have a huge impact on their sports and frankly society at large. Got a great platform. So certainly if the leadership of the men's tour came together and they had an agenda that they believed strongly in, I think they'd certainly persuade the rest of the so-called locker room.
um, I want to finish with you here because you've been dealing with obviously a lot during the pandemic, but one of the things we understand now is the whole racial climate in America and that conversation. And I did one of these with Bernard Muir maybe a month ago. And Bernard talked about how his own student athlete, Stanford's student athletes, and a number of Stanford's Black American student athletes had urged him to speak. And he did. And he wrote an incredibly personal letter. And I've known Bernard a long time. I had never heard that from him. And it was wonderful. So I'm curious, because since you've been with the Pac-12, I've been incredibly impressed by the amount of voice you've been willing to give to the student athletes, to listen to student athletes, everybody in the conference. Is there something that's moved you? Anything you've learned during the last, let's say, 2 months now that this has been accelerated? Anything, like I said, like I just learned from Bernard. My God, I've known you a long time and I had no idea about the experiences you've gone through.
Yes, I've had a lot of conversations with friends, and this is a topic we just kind of never went to in terms of conversation about their history or what they faced. And I think what's been most startling is the individual conversations I've had where I think I had my head buried in the sand a little bit about how pervasive racism is in everyday life. And I talked to friends who told me, there's no a Black friend you have that hasn't, been pulled over a few times because of the color of their skin or gotten a strange look when they're walking in somewhere. So, kind of the microaggressions and kind of everyday embedding of racism in our culture, I think I probably didn't fully appreciate. And something about what's happened over the last several weeks and months has enabled and encouraged and invited these very raw, hard, but important conversations. And then, I am a believer that we need to support our student athletes in being comfortable with these hard conversations, give them a platform, give them support to have these conversations. And then importantly, help them use their platform to go be active and make the world a better place as a result. And I think for me, interesting having this conversation with you, one of the few people that kind of is a bridge between the world of college sports that I'm in now and the world of tennis. A lot of my grounding about social justice and the role sports and athletes in particular can play really dates back to when I started on the tour in the late 80s. Started playing in the mid 80s, got involved in the late 80s. And this was during the time that Arthur Ashe had been very active in his campaign against apartheid. And the ATP wanted to get behind and support him. And so my early days as vice president of the Players Association on the board of the ATP Tour, we were part of, the boycott in South Africa, and really helped me understand and appreciate the power, but also the responsibility I think athletes, have to make the world a better place. Also got involved in, the campaign, for AIDS and in women's tennis, working with Shahar Peer and other players and the fight against, discrimination against Israelis, or not letting certain players with stamps in their passport come and play in certain places, fighting for equality and gender equality and other causes. I think tennis has been a great example of where individuals, have stepped up and been pioneers and used their platform and fought for causes. And that's, just kind of how I came up in the industry, and that was always important to me. Andre Agassi, another great example of an athlete that I really saw use his platform, make a big difference, raised a ton of money, starting charter schools. There's some great examples in tennis. Billie Jean, of athletes using their platform to make the world a better place and fight for causes they believe in. So that's always been my grounding. One of the things that attracted me to the Pac-10 at the time, now the Pac-12, is on the West Coast of the United States. This is a conference that's got a tremendous history of progressiveness, pioneering spirit, barrier breaking. Arthur was UCLA grad, Jackie Robinson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Steve Kerr. I was on a video call with him the other day, Golden State Warriors coach, speaking to some of our student athletes. And as a white former NBA player, Pac-12 student athlete, Arizona, now coach of the world champion Warriors, he's been one of the most outspoken, white sports leaders and executives on social justice issues. And so our conference, I think, really embraces this, supports it, as I do personally. And so I've helped us lean in to these issues, and we're trying to support our schools, support our student athletes, and having these conversations, putting together plans and things that we can do to make a difference. I'm an optimist, because I think there's, technology has allowed us to all see and viscerally experience some of the police brutality and racism that exists in ways that maybe, we couldn't a few years ago. And I think the younger generations that I deal with a lot, that are our current student athletes, are idealistic and want to make a difference and are engaged, more so than I've seen. And not just, our Black student athletes, but all. I think there's a sense of unity. We're all in this together. This is an American issue. It's not a Black issue. And, I'm optimistic the next generation is going to help us make the world a more tolerant, but a more fair and just society that we live in.
Yeah, that's well said. I've said this to a few people since I can vaguely remember 1968. This is different. And your tennis talk there is fabulous, because I was on with James Blake for about 35 minutes a few weeks ago, and that's exactly what we were talking about, was Arthur and his inspiration from Arthur. Personal regret, the only person in tennis I've never had a chance to meet. And I'm sad, in 30 whatever years around the sport, eventually you meet everybody, but sadly I never had a chance to meet him.
It would be a real short list of tennis leaders that you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but because of the impact, and I personally look, Arthur had a brush with the Pac, which is a great thing back when it was the Pac-8, and Billie Jean. My own daughter, I used to tell this to every female athlete in America. There should be a Billie Jean King Day, basically, because she's the most important figure in the history of women's sports in our country. So that's all well said. Tennis, what a link. Larry, I'm glad we were able to get you for about 20 minutes to get off the topic of COVID and campuses and all that. I know you're dealing all day with that, with your brethren from the other conferences. So thank you so much for doing this.
Great to spend time with you, Ted. Nice seeing you.